Hi, I'm Valerie Dixon, your host. Along with me is
Dorrit Smith.
and she will give us a quick recap as to what we covered in our last episode.
In the last episode, we were looking at
The
how
reset.
yes, how Europe was reset and who came into the Americas. We also looked at how Spain got to control so much of the West and the jealousy of the others, which brought of France and England, which brought them into the picture.
And in this episode, we're going to discover how pseudoscience and the rewriting of history was used to do the reset through the forced education system. Dorrit, what really happened here?
All right, we want to understand that industrialization and colonialism were the driving forces behind the subjugation of the non-white people, the copper-colored people. We were looking at how they used laws to reset the system. So, bringing in the pseudoscience and their anthropology and the rest of it was just another step in this reset, because everything that they did was to rob the non-white people of their wealth, their status, and eventually their humanity. So they used social engineering. Social engineering, according to the dictionary, is the use of centralized planning in an attempt to manage social change and regulate the future development and behavior of a society.
So let us pause here for a moment and really look into this thing. If these people are about social engineering, it means they want something from the non-white world. And this something could be total subjugation for them to carry out their plans for industrialization and deep colonialization.
Yes, and when we look at what they did to achieve this, we'll see that it was indeed something deliberately planned. It was no accident.
So to change people's behavior meant that you knew what you wanted. So if you want robots, then you're going to educate them to become
Yes.
and behave
Yes.
like robots.
So that is why they started out now with this forced education.
By forced education, what do you mean?
Every child had to go to school because they now have their set education that they want to pass on to these young ones. To disenfranchise them totally. They wouldn't know who they were. They wouldn't understand anything about their previous history because they would be taught something different, and this would now become their new truth.
Their new normal.
Yes.
So we're at the stage of having a new normal from back then. So let me ask you this now. When you rob a man of his identity, when you strip him of the clothes he's accustomed to having, when you strip him of his language, you are in actual fact making a slave.
Yes, and remember, one of the laws, some of the laws that they put in place actually made copper-colored people chattel.
Okay.
We're no property. But the thing is, like my old people used to say, the truth cannot remain buried, and the truth will swim like oil. So information will come out, and these generations coming up will not accept what you're handing them. So you have to double down on it and try your best to erase what they have in their memory, and you have to put something else in place through this forced education. So that was one, the education. Then they introduced anthropology. And this was in the 1800s and early 1900s.
Was this
And
a science?
yes, this was a scientific study of humanity. So human never knew themselves before. Humanity didn't know itself before. So you're going to tell them about humanity now. You're going to tell them who they are.
So this new science, or this fake science, or this pseudoscience, was to teach people who they were supposed to be.
Yes.
So even though you may have known who you are, it didn't suit their purposes for you to have an identity.
No, you're not supposed to know. If you know who you are, then they can't control you.
Oh.
And I should point out that they had a two-tiered education system.
Mm-hmm.
One for the elite and one for the rest of us.
Oh.
So the elite learned the lies, but only learned it so they would understand what we were being fed and the sort of narrative they should buy into.
So there were actually two curricula.
Mhm.
One for the ruling class,
Yes.
and the other for the working class.
Yes.
The ruling class had to learn how to control their workers.
Yes.
And it was mainly the non-white people who were going to be the workers.
Yes, ma'am.
But what about the poor whites? Where did they fall in this re-education? Were they among the ruling class?
Tell me something.
Yes.
You hear about the hillbillies and the rednecks and so on? How much
Yes.
education you think they have?
So they were not part of this plan
No,
then?
they were not part of the ruling class. Okay?
But wouldn't that put a wedge between themselves and the other people who were considered working class?
Think about it. Is there a wedge?
I'm not, you've lost me
Some
there.
people are sort of outside of the society. They fit nowhere.
Oh.
Okay, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about the official reset.
Okay.
Okay? You will always have fruits falling off the tree and leaves falling off and all. But we're talking about what is really on the tree.
Mhm.
Alright?
What was actually institutionalized?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, we said they used anthropology, which was a scientific study of humanity concerned with human behavior, human biology, culture, society, and linguistics, in both the present and the past,
Give
including
me those again, please.
human behavior, human biology,
Biology.
yes.
Is that to say that some of us were different, our biology was different?
That's what they wanted to say. And we're coming to that later.
Okay.
The human cultures.
So some cultures were better than others?
Yes, and their culture was very rich, and our cultures were just
Savage.
basic savage. Yes. Human behavior. Anything that we did was not acceptable. Like they didn't learn human behavior from us. They take this back to the past, how they whitewash the past, and they bring it into the present and set the stage for the future.
Oh, so the divisions are subtly being put in place.
So the whole thing is what makes us human. So they make themselves human and make us subhuman.
Ah,
Okay?
I see it now.
And they did it through Darwinism.
So the reset was actually discriminatory in its very nature.
Yes. Francis Galton, who was a British proponent of Darwinism, they used him to help with this scientific racism. And they also used eugenics. And eugenics is the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of, what you want.
Or to bring out the right traits within human beings.
The right characteristics that you regard as socially acceptable or more desirable. And then So it was education, social Darwinism, and eugenics that they use now to do this reset.
And of course, the reset is not going to be in the black people's favor at all.
Why would it be?
But we need to really look at where we are and why things are the way they are.
So they use this man named Boaz, Franz Boaz. We need to show a picture of Franz
Oh,
Boaz.
please. So, Franz Boas, he is advocating for.
He was a German-born American anthropologist, and he was a pioneer in modern anthropology. He was called the father of American anthropology. And Boaz single-handedly,
Let's get his name again.
Franz
Boas.
He single-handedly authored American anthropology.
You mean he wrote a book?
Him one make up American anthropology. Whatever he said, that is what became.
Gospel?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Lord.
And he decided that all copper-colored people came as slaves out of Africa.
So he, on his own, without any evidence to back up what he's saying, makes the decision that all black people, all swarthy people, all non-white people came from Africa
as slaves.
As slaves?
Yes.
And the whole world bought this?
Well, isn't that what we're talking about now? About the slave ships and the slavery from Africa?
So,
and every black person is a descendant of a slave? Isn't that the narrative now?
and that now was deliberately done
Yes.
so that we would feel less than.
Yes.
And they would appear better than.
Yes.
Ooh
And
la
yet,
la.
see how we talk about how they use some of us to help them to put us down. They always have a little
Insider.
Well, W.E.B. Du Bois, he was their insider.
Tell
Because you
us
see,
more.
he had enough of our blood in him for them to use him to push this idea, this out of Africa idea, and their social anthropology.
So, W.E.B. Du Bois, he was actually a mulatto.
Yes.
So he has white parentage and black parentage.
Yes.
But he identified with the white side or the black side.
I'm not saying which side and identify with, The fact is, the whites knew they found somebody they could use, right? But he knew, they knew, everybody knew that he was not white, right? But apparently he had no love for us because he wouldn't go
Actually help them.
to spread the lies about us. Because they drafted him so that he could lend some credibility among us
Hold
to
it right there.
their narrative.
You said they drafted him. Who were the real founders of NAACP? Yes.
Those were Jewish people.
I kept saying that it is not W.E.B. Du Bois who founded the NA.
No, he did not.
He was drafted
Yes.
to join.
Yes.
And it suited them because it appeared as if they were integrated.
The Jewish people in the 1800s, they are the ones who funded this kind of reset. And they funded the religious movement of the time, the revival movement and the religious movement of the time, out of which came the Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witness, and the Pentecostal movement.
Where did the Baptists come? Later, earlier, or it did not really matter?
It don't really matter. They were just spin-off from people like the Church of England and those who defected, right?
The Protestants.
But the big movement, big religious movement in the 1834, 38 coming on, They all sprung from the same pool. And out came Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostal movement. And all of this was to control the people and help to push the narrative. And they were all funded by the Jews.
Wow.
Yes.
So, and the narrative that they're pushing is to convince us that all black people came from Africa.
From Africa, because you see, if you came out of Africa and you came here as slave, then you have no right to the land, you have no real ties to the land.
So that means then that you as property can't own property.
You can't own anything, but then if you, because as I said, truth will swim like oil and water. And the old people didn't all die off with their memory. So if successive generation begin to find out more and more about who they are, you would be in trouble, Miss Whitey. So you have to bring you have to miseducate them, re-educate them, and do your along with your whitewashing.
So in other words, you're trying to get a homogeneous set of people who will believe what you want them to believe through a forced education system.
Yes.
So that's how we get the term, the miseducation of the Negro.
I guess that's where he
got that title
from. But the thing is now, when you train a set of people, you train them with this narrative. They have to pass an exam with this narrative. And they become the teachers of this narrative. Like when you go to university, how much research you really do. You read for a degree, but you read the books that they write.
Because
you have
nobody
to
who looks like you nobody has really written about you.
Exactly. And you regurgitate what they teach you in order to pass the exams.
And to satisfy a curriculum.
Yes, and this is passed down
for generations.
And that is why we believed that this was it. Until when the truth began to come out. So they use another one named Melville. Melville was Jewish. He was paid to write this book, The Myth of the Negro Past. And that was fiction, fairy tale. And later on, they didn't get the pushback. So it became fact. It was taught now as fact.
So it now enters into the history books.
Yes.
As facts.
Right. That plus the pseudoscience that went before, they get W.E.B. Du Bois to help to sell this narrative. And it was the Jewish people who did that. Melville was Jewish, right? They're the ones who bankrolled everything.
On the fact that
to reset the society. So the story now that we came out of Africa would mean that we have no ties to the land.
No ties in the West.
We have no right to land in the West because it was never ours.
And property cannot own property.
Exactly. You see, that is a doubling down on it. First they used property can't own property because at that time people knew that the land was theirs. So by the time now they got people to forget, or the younger ones to forget, that the land was theirs, and they saw themselves as slaves, then you tell them all slaves come out of Africa. All black people came out of Africa as slaves. So this land is not yours. And then they were registering indigenous people.
As
you paid $5 to be registered as an indigenous person. Who you think they registered as indigenous people?
white people.
Yes. So if you have no ties to the land, you can't make any demand. The land is not yours. You came here as slave. Your forefathers came here as slave. It's not yours. So then they registered these white people.
And give them all the available
Yeah,
land.
as long as they were willing to call themselves indigenous, they registered them as indigenous people.
So they could just paint them face,
They
whatever
never have
color.
to paint no face. They just decide which tribe they belong to, and they registered in that tribe. And that is where the term $5 Indian come from, because they paid $5 to become an Indian.
Wow. Like how some black people, just a little side step in here. Like how some black people paid 25 cents to become a member of the Anglican Church or the
Yes.
Church of England
Yeah, because
to get a little status.
and that's the only way you could succeed, or you could move on, because the church had to recommend you for something.
Oh, and if you're a member, then you have a little bit more leverage within the
So you
society.
could go to the schools and so on.
Oh yes, my book talks about how I got into a particular primary school, all based on the fact that I was christened.
in a particular church. Okay. Yes. So all part of the reset. So all of this was just to deprive us of what was truly ours, deny us what was ours, and to
Make it easy for them to steal our
Yes,
assets,
and to
like our
change-
land.
change our identity
Yes,
so we would know ourselves.
and we would know what actually belonged to us and the generations before.
Yeah, and this happened in the United States, but it also happened in Jamaica.
Really?
Yes, where indigenous people were similarly mislabeled. And when we look at the laws in the next episode, we will see the exact laws.
And what they did.
Yes,
I
we
see.
will see how those laws were manipulated. Yes, so the story was told. These stories were made up to deprive the copper-colored people, now called black people, of their heritage, their homeland, their wealth, and their identity.
So, in wrapping up, I want us to get back to W.E.B. Du Bois, because our national hero, Marcus Garvey, was literally hated by this man Du Bois, and he did everything in his power and succeeded in having Marcus Garvey deported to Jamaica, only for him to admit when it was too late to help Marcus Garvey that Marcus Garvey was right about us being black people who should have pride and dignity and self-esteem and to help ourselves. How did Du Bois lose his position with these people?
When they had no more use for him, they'd kick him out, just like what they do with anybody who they use.
So in other words, it still goes on today, where you're a token and you're placed on a pedestal, and when they have no further use for you, then you are kicked off
discard you.
and they
You see,
discard
it
you.
suited Du Bois at the time to discredit Marcus Garvey. He didn't want to associate with Marcus Garvey. He was rubbing shoulders with the Jewish people and white people. And he
Okay.
wanted to be a
And Marcus Garvey was for the grassroots
Yes,
people.
and Marcus Garvey preaching black power, black pride, black whatever.
Yes.
And
Self-help.
yes, and this was directly opposed to what Du Bois was paid to push.
He was one of those who said that the brightest of black people must try and integrate and
Yes.
be accepted.
Yes.
And when that didn't happen to him, what did he do? Denounce this citizenship. No, this man had to be an opportunist. Because it is my opinion that he became friends with the then president of, was it Ghana? Yes. Nkrumah.
Then if your friends kick you out, have no more use for you, You know, have to go look for
New
elsewhere.
friends, yes. And I actually been to Ghana and saw where W.E.B. Du Bois is buried. I couldn't believe it. And here it is that the man who was all about Africa, Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad, his feet, Marcus Garvey's feet, never touched African soil. And the man who helped to destroy him, where does he sleep? In Africa.
On African soil.
On,
or on the African soil.
On the African soil. So it just goes to show how we defeat ourselves and don't unite to bring about the full and true emancipation of black people.
But the truth is, if we don't know who we are and we don't know what was taken from us, we have no knowledge of that. It's not so easy for us to fight for what we don't believe is
that
right.
Is true.
It's
that
ours.
Is so true. And that is why it's so important
for us to learn that, we were wrong.
Yes.
And they still owe us.
Yes. And that will bring us to the episode dealing with reparations at a later date.
Yes.
But for the time being, people need to understand that it was the forced education, why some of us still believe to this day that they don't owe us anything.
Because we weren't taught anything else.
Precisely. So until the next episode, when
we look at the laws. We look at how the laws that they use to manipulate the system to bring us to where we are today.
Yes. I look forward to that episode. So until then,
ta-ta, Miss Val.